Back to the daily grind. Thanks for checking out the channel. Make sure to hit subscribe if you're new and hit thumbs up if you're not a baby back bagel biting bitch boy, cause you know what time it is. It's full time.
MMA.
Just one day after Kelvin Gastelum said that Robert Whittaker was taking the easy road by taking a fight with Luke Rockhold over him, Romero's manager has taken to Twitter in disgust to say that Kelvin Gastelum himself has turned down a fight with Romero. Now this is interesting, but it all makes sense. Let me explain why. Kelvin Gastelum is a guy who has beat some middleweight legends, but that is exactly what they are. They are guys that might be past their primes because they are already legends of the sport. Guys like Vitor Belfort, Michael Bisping, he was scheduled to face Anderson Silva twice. You know, he's been hitting a lot of guys. You know, it's like a legends ass kicking tour. But to be fair, a lot of them are past their prime. When he did fight a middleweight fighter that is in his prime, a top middleweight Chris Weidman, it definitely did not go Kelvin Gastelum's way. Although he almost dropped Chris Weidman, you know, with his boxing in the first round. Other than that, Chris Weidman made him kind of look like a welterweight, which is where Kelvin Gastelum is coming up from. Kelvin Gastelum was a former welterweight who has had weight cutting issues, so he was to move up to middleweight, where he still, in his last fight, he almost had trouble making weight. He did make weight, but it took a couple of tries, and the first try he almost had to use the towel. We all know how that happened. But Kelvin Gastelum is just a guy that's notorious for having weight cutting issues, so he's up in a weight class where he probably shouldn't be fighting at, as a lot of the guys, the Chris Weidmans and the Romeros of the division, the Luke Rockholds, are probably just going to be a little too big for Kelvin Gastelum, as we saw in the Chris Weidman fight. But with that being said, Kelvin Gastelum was, you know, trying to get a title shot with Robert Whittaker, the current UFC middleweight champion. After George St. Pierre vacated his belt, Robert Whittaker became the undisputed champion because he was the interim champion. Well, now Robert Whittaker needed an opponent for the main event, I believe, of UFC 221 in Perth, Australia. He's going to be defending his middleweight title, and the two contestants for the title shot, the two top contenders at this time, were Kelvin Gastelum and Luke Rockhold. Chris Weidman was also one, but he's out with an injury. So, out of Luke Rockhold and Kelvin Gastelum, Luke Rockhold gets the fight, and Kelvin Gastelum, the other contender, the other option, of course, comes out and says, hey, he's taking the easy road. Even though I disagree, that is just what Kelvin Gastelum said. This is what he had to say in a tweet. He said, y'all are forgetting Luke's also on a one-fight winning streak, got KO'd by a guy I just beat, and came back after 2 years to beat a guy who didn't compete in the UFC. Now, he's talking about both of these guys are only on a one-fight winning streak, as Kelvin Gastelum lost to Chris Weidman. Luke Rockhold lost his title to Michael Bisping, and since then he's only fought one guy, David Branch, and now he's getting a title shot after being out for a while and not, you know, just sitting through and fighting the top contenders. But to be fair, the middleweight division has been it's been a little stagnant, as Michael Bisping was the champion. He fought like the 12th ranked contender Dan Henderson, and then he went to fight GSP, who wasn't even in the middleweight division. So these top middleweight contenders have not had a lot of incentive to really want to just, why would I want to fight Chris Weidman and then Romero and then Jacare and then Whittaker, when no matter what, if I beat all three of them, I'm probably not getting a title shot until Bisping is done with Henderson and fucking GSP. So Luke Rockhold's one of those guys that was just like, hey, it doesn't make much sense for me to just fight right now if I'm not going to be fighting for a title shot, and he set out. Well, and that's, you know, just my logic. I don't know fucking Luke Rockhold, but that's just what makes sense. I mean, we see that in these stagnant divisions, whenever the champion's out doing his thug dizzle in another sport, as in Conor McGregor's situation, or if the champ's injured, these guys don't have a lot of incentive to fight. Like if Conor McGregor's fighting Nate Diaz, or if Conor McGregor's fighting Floyd Mayweather, Tony Ferguson doesn't have an incentive right now to fight, you know, these guys. A lot of these guys, the division becomes stagnant. So that's what's happened in the middleweight division. Kelvin Gastelum is saying that Robert Whittaker is taking the easy road by fighting Luke Rockhold, and I can't agree with that. I mean, if you just asked me out of Luke Rockhold and Kelvin Gastelum, who's the better middleweight, you've got to go with Luke Rockhold, the former middleweight champion. He has beat top middleweights, and although everyone always, of course, is going to hold it against him, he got knocked out by Bisping. Nobody expected that to happen. Anybody can get dropped, and if you want to say, oh, he got knocked out by Bisping, it's a little more, and this is just me, it's a little more of a factor of a loss. Like, getting ragdolled and taken down 8 times by Chris Weidman is a little more of a convincing loss than just getting caught by Michael Bisping and him following up. You know, if you get knocked out in 13 seconds, we don't know how the second fight's gonna go. You're probably not gonna get another knockout in 13 seconds. But if you dismantle a guy over 3 rounds, as we saw in the Max Holloway fight versus Jose Aldo, you can probably expect that to happen in the second fight. If Chris Weidman fought Kelvin Gastelum again tomorrow, the fight would probably be Chris Weidman taking him down over and over, trying to avoid the boxing if he had to. But if Kelvin Gastelum doesn't land that big shot in the first round, then it's just a really one-sided fight for Chris Weidman. Now, if Luke Rockhold fought Michael Bisping tomorrow, we're not going to expect a knockout for Michael Bisping, even though it happened in the first fight. So, yes, Luke Rockhold did get knocked out by Michael Bisping, but that was, you know, it shocked the world. He was a huge underdog. No one expected that. No one would still say Michael Bisping is a better fighter than Luke Rockhold. And it's a little different when you, as I said, the Chris Weidman, Kelvin Gastelum situation. So I would not agree that Robert Whittaker's taking the easy road. On top of that, if you go off of entertainment value, if you go off of who probably has a bigger following at this point, it's probably Luke Rockhold. So it probably makes better financial sense, and Robert Whittaker, he said he wanted the tough fight, which is why he took Luke Rockhold. And so honestly, if you want the tougher fight or the bigger fight, you're probably picking Luke Rockhold here. And so that brings us to our next point, which is interesting, that right after Kelvin Gastelum says that Robert Whittaker took the easy road fighting Luke Rockhold, Yoel Romero's manager is revealing on Twitter that none other than Kelvin Gastelum himself is turning down a fight with Yoel Romero at UFC Berlin. And now, do I understand that? Yeah, because what would happen in a Yoel Romero-Kelvin Gastelum fight? We know Yoel Romero is a very big middleweight who's also a very strong wrestler, similar to Chris Weidman. So if Kelvin Gastelum does not knock out Yoel Romero, he's probably going to get ragdolled like he did in the Chris Weidman fight. So Kelvin Gastelum's got to be careful as a middleweight who's kind of fighting at welterweight, as a former welterweight that's fighting at middleweight, I should say, because there's going to be some guys, some of the most elite guys, even though Yoel Romero's age is, you know, in the range of Kelvin Gastelum's opponent, he's had success against at middleweight. You know, he's had success against the guys that are like 35 to 40 years old in the middleweight division, not so much against Chris Weidman. Even though Yoel Romero fits that age range, he's still probably a little too big, a little too athletic for Kelvin Gastelum, who's coming up from welterweight. Kelvin Gastelum's going to probably need to fight the strikers of the middleweight division. He's going to probably have to avoid the wrestlers that are still in their prime. So that's why it's tough for Kelvin Gastelum being at middleweight. You know, if he could maybe get to the UFC Performance Institute, or if he could get to nutritionist, I don't know what it is, but he probably is a guy that should be fighting at 170 or 175 pounds, but it's just hard to say that because in his most recent fight at 185 pounds, he almost missed weight. He made weight, but it was real fucking close. A little bit of shenanigans there in Shanghai. So with that being said, man, this is very interesting. I don't know who Yoel Romero is going to fight now, because Yoel Romero needs a fight. Yoel Romero's been wanting to fight. He's been wanting to fight Bisping. Kelvin Gastelum's probably not going to fight Romero. Bisping's probably not going to fight Romero in his last fight, even though that's probably a fight a lot of us want to see. I'm ready to see Yoel Romero get back in the cage, but he's one of those guys that people kind of look at as a high risk, low reward. And whenever a lot of these fighters, you know, that's the opposite of what they want. A lot of fighters want the lowest risk and the highest reward, as we see in the GSP scenarios and stuff. Well, here, Yoel Romero is not a guy that's got a huge fan base, and he's also got a high risk of a brutal knockout, like we saw in the Chris Weidman fight. At any moment, you can just land one of them fucking knees, one of them Cuban missiles, and take you out. So Yoel Romero is a high risk, low reward fight. That's why a lot of guys turn down this fight. They might not win it, and on top of that, if they do, they're probably still, you know, Kelvin Gastelum's trying to get a title shot without the win. If he gets a win, he'd probably still be trying to get a title shot. It's not a guarantee. So they would probably fight Yoel Romero for an interim title, but that's probably not going to be the case. So it's interesting. I do actually believe Malki Kawa's, you know, they probably, there's not a reason for him to lie, for one. And it also, that fight doesn't seem like a fight that Kelvin Gastelum would want in his career right now. I mean, we just saw him lose to a middleweight wrestler, kind of like Yoel Romero, and Yoel Romero beat that guy. So it is what it is, man. I've said enough on this video. A lot going on in the middleweight division. We'll see how things shake out. We do know that Robert Whittaker will be facing Luke Rockhold for the middleweight title at UFC 221. After that fight happens, we're probably going to see some of these guys waiting for the title shot, because nobody really wants to fight with Yoel Romero. And I know that there's not a lot of guys you can get to fight Yoel Romero. So the UFC is going to have to entice somebody or something with an interim title shot. I don't know how they're going to do it, but it's interesting that Kelvin Gastelum said that Robert Whittaker took the easy road, and one day later, Yoel Romero's manager says he turned down a fight with Yoel. So that's pretty funny. So with that being said, it is what it is. Let the Full Time family know what the fuck you tell me in the comments. I'm out.
Da 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 da. It's the motherfucking DOWG.